Hello, this is Scott Jentz. Welcome to Sandbox Stories. Hello, this episode of Sandbox Stories features an interview with Dr. Millicent Knight. Dr. Knight has served the profession in a wide array of roles, from owner of a private practice to driving professional relations for major industry vendors. I'm very thrilled to have her with us, and I'd like to welcome you, Dr. Knight, to Sandbox Stories.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here.
You know, let's start with your path to optometry. You started academics at a high school that required some sort of entrance testing, and it was in an impoverished community. Tell us about that time in your life.
Yeah, so I attended a high school in an area that was not where we lived. And as a matter of fact, most of the students who attended school there did not live in the community. I'm sort of unfortunate for the children who did live in a community that didn't pass the test. They weren't allowed to go to school there. So it was a little awkward for us. But again, the majority of the students commuted to that school. And I would say the student population was interesting too. It was about maybe 90% African-American students from all over the city. And then there were maybe 10% Chinese students, and that was the student makeup.
And this was in Chicago?
This was in Chicago.
Oh, interesting. So your husband went to the same high school. Did you know him then?
I did, but not well. He was upperclassman.
He was an upperclassman. So your husband has a story about getting into medicine. He's a physician. Can you give us a little insight on his background?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, we went to the same school. Both of us were very smart students in our grade schools, our grammar schools. And I actually was double promoted from second to fourth grade. I didn't go to third grade.
Wow.
But when I got to high school, suddenly I was with all these other kids who were also really smart. So it was kind of an eye-opening experience, and but a great experience because it really grounded me, and with professors, teachers who really seemed to have a vested interest in us doing well and expected us to do well. And I say that because that's not the experience I had when I got to college.
I'm sorry.
My husband went to SIU for undergrad. For medical school. He always wanted to be a family practitioner. And his father actually had gotten accepted to medical school, but was then drafted. And when he returned, was no longer able to attend. So I think he really wanted his sons to be physicians. And my husband is the one of three boys who did.
Which war did he get drafted into?
And he was older when he had his children, so he was in World War II.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. He never had a chance to go back, but that's great.
No, he ended up being a chemistry professor.
Really? That's interesting. Yeah. That's really interesting.
So needless to say, my husband couldn't be too shabby in chemistry. Otherwise, big reprimand.
Well, I mean, the smarts carried right through, obviously. That's a rigorous area of study and expertise. Your family, you're from Chicago. Your dad was a 30-year postal carrier in the neighborhood near our alma mater at the Illinois College of Optometry. And you told me he was known as Friendly Bob. That's kind of there's a lot of tough neighborhoods around there, very ethnic neighborhoods, very protective of each other. Tell us about how your dad influenced so many different folks in that area.
Yeah, I know my dad was always this kind of person who was able to move in and out of different worlds, and always got along well with a lot of people. In addition to being a postal carrier, he was military police until mandatory retirement at 59 and a half.
Okay.
That's the time period where they kick you out, I guess. But he had the same route, and he walked his route. So he knew everyone in the community. He was actually familiar with ICO before I was, because he used to deliver the mail to the students who lived in the area. So the neighbors got to know him really well. He really looked out for everyone. He knew everyone's family dynamics. And you are probably familiar with the community. It's Bridgeport. And Bridgeport was not the friendliest place for an African-American person to be in. But for some reason, they seemed to embrace him. And as a matter of fact, when he retired, they actually gave him a retirement party at the big Catholic church there in the community. But we did have one incident, and it actually had to do with me. So I used to go and study with a classmate. Her name's Dee Roeder, and she and I would study together at her house, and she lived in Bridgeport, and she lived next door to a bar. And so my dad was in the bar one day, and the owner said, Jim, I hate to tell you this, but I've heard someone saying some really negative things about a Black woman that comes to visit the next door neighbor. And I am almost sure it's your daughter that he's talking about. And he's saying that he's going to kill her for, coming to the community. And so my dad told me that I could no longer go to Dee's house. And, and he also said he was going to hurt her for inviting me over in the first place. So Dee and I said, Dee said, well, they're not going to stop us from studying together. We're going to continue to study. We'll just go to my mom's house or your mom's house. And but my father told me that under no circumstances could I come back to Bridgeport, because if someone hurt me, he would find out who it was. He would take care of that. And, it just was not going to be a good situation. So the last couple of years when I was in optometry school, some of my classmates would tease me about not ever coming to any of the study sessions or to anybody's house for parties. And I was so embarrassed by the situation that I never told them why. I just would make up some reason why I couldn't come. But that was a challenging situation. And it was unfortunate that I think when the school talked about the community, which, it had its challenges all the way around for all of the students. But I don't remember when going through orientation, anyone ever talking about that it was a different experience for those students of color, that they would need to be careful in that particular community.
It's sort of an interesting part of the year 2021 narrative that we've gotten to a point where you can feel unencumbered to tell the story, but you couldn't, even to your classmates then. And I think about your dad having this relationship with the community where he was looked at and perhaps not considered one of the community, but he was the postal carrier, so he was Friendly Bob, and the bartender gave him this information, and yet in the end gives you this really uncomfortable experience and having to change the way you do it. I'm just encompassing all that, and I don't know what to do with that, but it's sort of my restatement, and it's sad.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, because you're right. The surrounding neighborhood there was primarily people of color, was abutted by also an Asian community. But it was primarily that parts of that community were impoverished, and that was the bigger issue. The people who were maybe unfortunately harmed in the area may have been harmed because of a robbery type situation, but it was never based on hate or anything like that.
Right.
And, I was just at risk for that too, because right. It was sort of equal opportunity from that perspective.
Absolutely.
I think all the students and all the dynamics of the situations in a community like that need to be pointed out, because there were 4 other Black students in my class that started with me, and none of them were from the Chicago area. So they had no familiarity with both the Black areas around there or the white areas around there. So being able to give more of a comprehensive orientation probably would be helpful for students in the future.
Yeah.
I want to say one other thing about that area too. It also had a very upper middle income community embedded right next to our school. And I think that, we sort of, when this often happens, when you see Black people, there's this blanket assumption, but there are a lot of doctors and nurses who lived in that community and were part of the 2 abutting hospitals in the area. And they lived there for years. So, and because the community was also closer to the lake. So It was a great area. It was almost like two different worlds. You go a few blocks to the east and you walk into a completely different community.
That is very true. And
Yeah.
what about your mom? She worked very hard when you were young. What did she do?
Yeah, so I grew up on a street with, I have two sisters. I'm in the middle. And I grew up on a street with where most of the mothers were stay-at-home moms. And my mom worked outside of the home. And I also grew up with a housekeeper, which, maybe we grew up in a, middle income community. The majority of the people on our street were African American. There were two white families on my street. Just decided they were too old to move and never did. And if you know Chicago, so the flight situation that took place in the '60s when my parents bought their home there. But anyway, my father, I guess, had grown up during the time when sometimes he was left alone, and he had this whole notion about his daughters never being left alone. So, in order for my mother to be able to work, we had a full-time housekeeper. She didn't stay overnight, but she came every day, and she wore a white uniform. She was very formal, and it was a little different, but she was kind of like a part of the family. She was an older woman, so almost like a grandmother. And she was there. I remember her being there from the time I was 5 till after I graduated from college. And she only left then because she died.
Oh, wow.
But she was wonderful. I mean, she taught us etiquette. She taught us how to cook. She taught us. She was very particular about not doing the things that were our personal chores. And I tried.
Yeah, sure.
She was having no part of it. But it was a great experience for me. I just felt I grew up, even the neighbors around us, everyone knew your family rules, if you will. So if you tried to go outside, I could go outside we got home by 3:30. If I was outside before 4 o'clock, one of the neighbors would stop you and say, Millie, what are you doing outside? Have you finished your homework yet? I know you're not supposed to be out before you. So it was very old school like that, and you didn't dare say anything back, because not only would you be reprimanded by them, but then you got it again when your folks got home. So it was just, it's a different world now, but that's kind of the way I grew up. I want to tell you one other thing about the area I grew up in. I grew up on a street with all boys, and they were having no part of playing with a girl. And I got really frustrated one day, and I went in and I told my dad about it. And he didn't say anything. He just said, "Come with me." And we got in the car. We drove to a sporting goods store, and he bought basketball, baseball, football, hockey sticks, pucks, everything. Put it in the car, and we came home. When we got home, he said, "Now, you take your new toys outside, and if they want to play with your toys, you have to play also." So that's what happened. So I went from being, they started to let me play, but it was one of these, when you pick teams, I'll take Scott, I'll take this, I'll take this, I'll take Millie. It went from that to, and I hated that. So I worked really hard and I got really good at every sport. And I went from being, I'll take Millie, right off. So I learned about perseverance from that early experience. And I also learned that God blesses the child that has her own.
Did you end up playing any sports in high school or college because you developed skill?
I was very athletic growing up, and I ran track and field. I was a cheerleader in high school, and I was captain. And in college, I ran track again, and I also played on the women's basketball team. Okay. Until the pesky little labs that we had to go to got in the way. And my mother sort of suggested that at 5'4", the chances of me being recruited to a basketball team were probably pretty slim, so I should go to lab.
So let me ask you this question.
After that.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question. You attended Augustana College and you did a lot of international travel. So did you find that you had wanderlust in you, or did wanderlust kind of pull you over there where you became really enamored of traveling internationally?
I think it found me, and I think uh, so we had a foreign quarter where you could go to, and in that particular year was South America, and I think it was 4 faculty members, and they took 60 students, and I was only 18 at the time, although I was in my second year of college, and we went on this trip, and every 2 weeks we went to a different country. And so we were actually studying about those particular areas, and we were right there in the midst of those areas, just studying the geography, geology, history, and the language. So it was a fantastic experience. And after going all throughout South America, I came back to Augustana, which, is a very small school. And it felt very, tight after that, if you will. But it was a great experience. And then I did a lot of eye missions to different areas in Central and South America. I've done them in Haiti. I've done them in, I've gone to South Africa, a number of other areas. And then I also did some travel with my mother, who was a CEO of a mental health agency, worked her way up to that point. And part of their work was they did some work with different social work groups who happened to, who were embracing different issues. One of the trips that was the most interesting for me was I went to South Africa with her right after apartheid change. And they were going, her team was going to help train the social workers there to deal with some of the depression and some of the alcoholism that was going to manifest. They predicted would manifest when things didn't change overnight. And that was really an eye-opening experience for me, going so soon after that transition.
What a great set of stories around travel. You have equally interesting stories about practice. You've done a lot. You started in a hospital-based OD/MD co-management practice, and you had hospital privileges. I think many optometrists don't even know what that means. Some have it, many don't. Tell me a little bit about that practice setting and the hospital privileges part of it.
Yeah, so when I started in this practice, which was actually a great way to start, that was my first job out of optometry school. It was 2 older ophthalmologists and one younger, an older optometrist and older ophthalmologist, and the 2 of them tended to work together. And then there was a younger ophthalmologist, and he and I worked together. And it was interesting. He told me he had actually trained in the Indian Health Services with optometrists. And he said, I'm going to tell you, I trained with the optometrists in this Indian Health Services, and I know what the optometry residents know how to do. And so I expect you to practice to the fullest extent of your capabilities so that I can practice to the fullest extent of mine. And that's how we're going to grow this practice. So that was the expectation. So I went to the hospital and I said, I need to have hospital privileges. And they said, we don't have hospital privileges. We don't have any rules for optometrists. And I said, well, I'll write them then. And I wrote the rules. I wrote the privileges, which included things like assisting in surgery, et cetera. And they passed it. And that's really the foundation. I understand, I know someone who's still on faculty now, and those rules are still the foundation for the rules that they have today. And that was in the 90s. So, but I did all the pre-op care, post-op care for all the cataract surgeries, the corneal transplants. We did quite a few of those. We had a lot of diabetic patients, glaucoma patients, foreign bodies, because we're in a steel mill community. So some of these guys were slow learners. I would have the discussion with them about put on your safety glasses, do not take them off until you walk out of that place. But they would always leave and they'd come back to fix one more machine, and then, something would happen. So, I was taking these things out of it. But, the ophthalmologist said, do not call me out of surgery to come and take a foreign body out. That's something you have to handle. So that's how I started practicing. And so I had a pretty strong medical model practice myself when I did end up buying a practice.
Let's talk about that. You ended up in private practice. I assume that your medical model followed you. Did you do any other specialties? What was your private practice like?
Well, the whole way to get into that practice was interesting. So I moved to, actually, I was doing a mission in Costa Rica, and I met a couple who were in the mission, and they were an older couple, and they wanted to sell their practice in Evanston. That's how I got there. And I said, well, I'll go and work part-time just to see if the community is receptive to me. I like the community. And I did. And I moved there, and we actually weren't able to work through an arrangement that worked for both of us. So one day, out of frustration, I was walking down the street in the opposite direction that I usually walk. And one of the things you asked me about is my hobbies. I like to walk. So, but I walked in a different direction, and I saw this small practice, and I'd never noticed it before. So I just walked in the door, and there was this kind of like older, like 70-ish-year-old man who was kind of like, he said, "May I help you?" And I said, and I have no idea how I mustered the courage to do this, but I said, "Do you have any intentions of retiring anytime soon?" And, before he threw me out of the office, he did say, "Well, I know that you're a competitor down the street from me. And if you do leave that space," because I told him I was planning on leaving, he said, "then you come back and talk to me." And I did leave just like I told him I would. And he actually reached out to me. And 5 weeks later from that conversation, I owned his practice and he was my employee.
Wow. And did you stay in that space, or did you move over time?
No, he had actually been in that space for almost 40 years. And we did some renovations to the space to make it more palatable for 2 people. One of the reasons that I insisted that I buy the practice and then employ him rather than us being partners is because I knew that there would be some resistance in terms of making an investment in making sure the patients have the right type of experience from my perspective. And that would involve investment in technology, bringing in state-of-the-art type equipment and making sure the patient, again, had a pleasant experience. And he was not going to be willing to make that investment at that juncture in his career. He was almost, working, he was still working every day, but not really the same way he had years earlier. So the area that we were in was a pretty affluent area, and the real estate on that street was very expensive. But I remember him saying, I've been paying rent for 40 years. If you ever have an opportunity to buy something on this street, hock your soul and do it. So we got to the point where we were sort of stepping over each other. And I saw a building that I liked, and I called my realtor about it. And she said, "Well, that's great that you like that building, a nice corner building with a pharmacy on one side and a hardware store on the other, which is the 2 areas that you want to get close to when you're buying real estate, because that's where people need to go." And she said, "Well, that building's not available." And I said, "Well, that's the building that I want." And a week later, that building came on the market.
Wow.
We jumped on it and made an offer, and go. It was super expensive, but my mother said, "Do the numbers work? Before you decide whether it's expensive or not, do the numbers work?" Because there were tenants in the building. The pharmacy was going to be a tenant. There were several other buildings, businesses in there. And once I ran the numbers did work. So it was just a matter of making the commitment to, purchases. I was a single woman at that time. So I did it, and, I've not had any regrets.
It's a great lesson for independent optometrists who choose to be in business themselves, that the real estate side can be really challenging, but it can bring tremendous opportunity. And it is about doing the math and being level-headed about it. That's wonderful for you. Do you happen to still own the building? Because we're going to talk next about your post-practice life. Do you still own it?
I do. I do still own the building, and there's actually still an eye care practice there. So now there's been an eye care practice on that street that's affiliated with me and the former owner for over 70 years, 70.
That's wonderful.
So I feel good about the continuity there, and just making sure that the patients still have access to that type of practice. I was going to circle back to your question about the traveling, and just mention that I think that traveling is in some ways shaped and developed who I am as a person. The fact that I love people, and that I've had to depend on the kindness of strangers many times. And I've certainly tried to help people in the same way, especially when I see someone that's foreign or, to the area and struggling to find their way around. I had a really funny story in Japan where I was on a train going to Kamakura, and the train stopped suddenly. And it was like the L train in Chicago, it was a train like that. And the train stopped and everybody Japanese got off the train. And I looked around, there was only like a few people who looked American still on the train. And then all of a sudden, this older Japanese lady got back on the train and grabbed me by the hand and pulled me off the train. But I guess the train was broken and I just didn't understand, what they were saying. But there's just been, my mother and I were in Sweden, there's just been all kinds of situations like that. But I've been on through 5 of the 7 continents to over 50 countries. And I feel really blessed to have had those experiences.
What are the 2 continents that are left?
Antarctica and Australia, yes.
Yeah.
And I guess there's also some speculation as to whether or not there's one more continent. I don't know, but I've heard that.
We'll get into the geography battles of that specialty.
Yes.
So one of the things that makes your career really compelling to me, and something for which I'm really grateful for, is that you left practice and went on to join industry, stalwarts in how they work with our colleagues. And the first was Johnson & Johnson Division. What was that like, first time out of practice doing this kind of industry work?
A steep climb. Even though I had spent a considerable amount of time actually consulting for them. I consulted for them as a professional affairs consultant for 10 years before I actually went to work for them. And so I felt like I knew the sales team, I knew the dynamics of the company, but it's nothing like actually being physically in there that's when you really learn the dynamics. I think it would have been a really steep climb, especially since at the level that I went in, if I had not had that tenure of experience prior to. So I had done also in-market assessments for different technologies or innovations that they were considering bringing to the market. My practice was a testing site for some of those innovations. So I had gotten, my patients were used to, okay, what are we going to try this time? What's happening this year? They've sort of gotten used to that. And I consulted for a number of companies, primarily because I've always believed that it's incumbent upon us as part of the oath that we take when we're safeguarding that patient to make sure that we also work directly with industry to ensure that the products and services that are developed are really going to be best for the patients. And patients depend on us to make sure that when we're bringing something or introducing something to them or making a recommendation or diagnosing or treating, that we're doing that from a space of knowing. And for me, that space of knowing was actively touching and feeling and getting involved, understanding the missions of these companies. Why are you in business? What's your mission? Does it match mine? Are we trying to do the same types of things? And so once I established that, Johnson & Johnson to me had, with their credo, matched my own mission of wanting to provide the absolute best services to my patients in the community. And I will tell you, Scott, that was one of the hardest decisions, probably the hardest decision I've ever made in life, because I do consider myself a clinician. I do consider myself a healer. And not going into clinical practice, not staying in clinical practice was just not something I thought I would do, although I really, really enjoyed being involved with industry and being able to be a bridge, if you will, to closer and better communication between the profession and the industry. And that's actually one of my patients when I gave notice that I was going to be leaving. One of my patients said, Dr. Knight, my husband left me, but never in a million years did I think you would leave me. It's just like, oh my God. But on one of those days when I was at kind of my lowest, one of the patients said to me, you've always been interested in making sure that we had great innovations and great products. And I just see what you're doing next is just ensuring that we still get that, but doing it on a bigger level. And, I was like, that's it. That's exactly what I needed to hear that day. So, that was kind of the transition. And then, my husband was, we had a small child at the time. My son was 5. And he said, you've always been interested in working with industry. You've been consulting for a number of companies. And if we're ever going to do this, this is the time. This is the time that we can actually move him. And I'm at a point where I'm willing to support you doing that.
That's wonderful. And it just was a beginning, because today you're Senior Vice President for Customer Development for Essilor of America. And I like how you describe this to me. You bring the voice of the doctor as the Chief Optometric Officer. So the first thing I think of is, does a company that large take the ample amount of time that's necessary to really understand both the doctor's needs and the multifactorial changes that exist, challenges that exist in a practice?
Yeah, I do think that they do try and do that, but you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't have a person like me that can say, that's a great idea, but it's not going to work because of A, B, and C, or if I can redirect and say, this is the primary focus that optometrists have top of mind. These are their chief concerns. This is what they have to navigate every day. In addition to the fact that we may want to sell a product to them that we believe is great, how is it going to fit in with the dynamics of the practice? Is it going to be disruptive? How are we going to make sure that the staff are trained? The doctor might come back enthusiastic. You know how we are. We'll come back enthusiastic with this new toy or this new thing that we want to try. And the staff roll their eyes because now you've just added one more thing to their plate that, they're already trying to balance so many different things. So part of what my team does is we make sure that the eye care professionals that work on that doctor's team are trained on different areas. We take that off their plate. We make sure that they're trained on not just products, and that's one of the things I really like about our program, but we train them on metrics, particularly the managers of the practices. These are the types of things that you need to keep track of so that you can help grow the practice. And that's one thing that comes off the doctor's plate. And that's really, we've had some great success with that program. We also have a CEOD program, which also helps the doctor then look at the metrics that they should be doing and helps them get comfortable with delegating better. Not running tests, not doing tests. You should be interpreting, you should be having the conversations, you should be making the recommendations. You are the doctor, you should be treating and managing, not running tests. So, does that sound like a soapbox?
No, it sounds great, because, in a nutshell, what you said is an industry company, even a large one like that, really does take the time to learn the things maybe they didn't know and then apply instruction back to the doctors in a way that they can apply in their business. So it's a symbiotic relationship that is a really important one to understand. And then
one of the things that I really applaud Essilor for is that they have made the commitment to put a doctor, an optometrist, on the senior management team. All companies don't do that. But my feeling is you're developing products and services for these individuals. You must have their input.
So outside of optometry, you're a certified holistic health coach. Can you educate us about what that means?
Yeah, I just got my certification yesterday.
Look at that plaque.
So I was actually a certified health coach even initially back in 2011 as I just recertified. My patients, and I've always had this philosophy too, I've always believed in looking at the whole person. I think optometrists should look at the whole person while focusing on the eyes. I watch patients when they walk through the door. I watch their gait. I watch their mannerisms. I watch all of those things because that gives me valuable information when I'm coming up with the diagnosis for them. That's why I've been able to diagnose high blood pressure, patients with strokes, just a myriad of things. But I think we just have to, as we look as optometrists as becoming a broader part of the fabric of the healthcare system, we have to look at the whole patient. And I was fortunate in that my patients actually wanted to be actively engaged in their own healthcare. They didn't want to just take a drop for glaucoma and then 2 drops and then 3 drops and then be referred for surgery. They wanted to know, why do I have this chronic inflammatory condition? And what can I do to contribute to that? So that was the way that I thought for myself. And I felt a little disingenuous because I'd always sort of married and balanced an integrative approach to holistic and natural care, particularly around nutrition, with conventional care. So I decided to become the health coach, and I also did a fellowship with the American Academy of Anti-Aging Regenerative Medicine. And in that fellowship, most of the people in the fellowship, most of the doctors in the fellowships were actually internal medicine physicians. And I remember one class in particular, we had a PhD who was instructing us from Harvard. And he didn't know I was an optometrist in there. But anyway, he's just talking to the group. He says, I'm a doctor, but I'm a PhD. But if I'm a doctor like you all, if I'm internal medicine, I'd be hooking up with an optometrist. And I thought, and he said, because my research shows, first of all, optometrists have slit lamps and they know how to use them. My research that I'm working on right now shows that there are particular conditions in the eyes that are directly correlated with early onset or biomarkers, if you will, for conditions systemically. So, for instance, those patients who have early onset nuclear sclerotic cataracts also have a higher probability of cardiovascular disease. And if you were working directly with an optometrist and they can identify that for you earlier, that optometrist could get that patient to you and get you under care before they end up having some catastrophic incident. And the same thing with post-subcapsular cataracts. The beta amyloid plaque that's seen on the back surface of that lens is also the same beta amyloid plaque that's seen in early Alzheimer's. So optometrists are such an important part of the healthcare system, but we don't act that way. And I really would love to see us really step up to the plate. We're super smart. Patients trust us. And we should be functioning as a stronger force in the healthcare system.
So for the audience members who are compelled by this, what would be the one thing they should do when they get done listening to your interview that would get them started down that path?
I think that they should, first of all, examine the mission that they have in their practices. And if you don't have a mission, you need to get one so that you know that you are actually moving along a course. And if you run into some challenges or if you have a decision to make, you look back at your mission, it tells you what to do. If you don't know about nutrition, if you don't feel comfortable in that space, I would encourage everyone to learn a little bit more about that. Often patients think that, well, my physician didn't say anything about that. Well, my physicians don't get a lot of nutrition within the coursework that they have. But that's such an important part, particularly when we see the increasing number of patients with diabetes and diabetic-related sequelae. A lot of that is lifestyle and nutrition-based. And why not get that information from an optometrist? I did a program once at J&J where we worked with Johnson & Johnson Vision, Johnson & Johnson Diabetes Institute, and the AOA. And we identified doctors around the country that were part of the AOA and asked them if they would participate in this study where the optometrist was the one who actually introduced the glucometer to the patient and started them, if they identified, first of all, that the patient had some signs of diabetes in the eyes, or if the patient told them that they hadn't been compliant. The one organ, the one sense that patients don't want to lose is the vision. And that's why we're so important, because, the endocrinologist can tell them all day long that their blood glucose levels are high. You've got to control your A1C. I'm going to pull out a picture from their Optomat or from something else and show them this is what your eye looks like. And this is going to mean you will be blind. And, they kind of get religion when they, see something like that, because that's the last thing that they want to have happen.
So I want to talk to you about your son again. He's got these incredible role models. He's a young Black man, a teenager, early teenager. That's got a profound impact on him, I'm sure. But can you tell us about parenting today in our environment and how you feel about his future? I'm sure he's got that same intelligence chain coming down to him that's come from others, but tell us about that a little bit.
Well, it's funny, so you and I graduated around the same time. So God has a sense of humor. We have this little kid, right? Still. But, my mother says you take your blessings when they come. I was a later in life mother. And it's interesting. My son was born in 2008. So for the first 8 years of his life, the president of the country was a Black man that looked like him. That was just normal to him. Um, Most of my family members, there's between my husband and I, our family, there are 10 children, all have at least a college degree, some multiple master's degrees. And so, it's just, and his best friend on our street was, mother was German, father's Irish. They did everything together. They're 2 months apart in age. So that's just normal to him. But more recently, he has really been, I think, disturbed by some of the things he's seen with for instance, with the George Floyd murder and death, with the riots at the Capitol, and mixed in with the COVID, and then us having to relocate for my job and being in a completely new environment. And he's a trooper. He's a really good athlete. He's very smart, particularly in math. And he's good at making friends. But I was really, it's heartbreaking in that I feel like I have to watch him a lot closer than I think my parents had to watch me, just because, we're in an environment we don't know as well. With COVID, that has caused him some stress and anxiety. But he said to me the other day, Mom, between COVID and Black men being killed, I'm afraid to go outside. And I mean, it just broke my heart. And my husband and I started having the talk. And any Black person knows what that means. The talk is having a conversation about how you will be viewed differently than some of your friends, and how you can't get away with some of the things that your friends might get away with. If you're ever stopped by the police, you put your hands, and we tell them exactly how you put your hands in a position. You don't make any quick moves. You don't say anything back. Even if you're completely not, have done nothing wrong, our concern, even though it's a emotionally devastating experience to have these things happen to you. But what's most important to us is that you come home alive, safe and alive. And so we've had to have those discussions, but I can see his little spirit. Like, he's a confident, strong boy, but I see his spirit sort of, I don't know how to describe it, but it's a look in his eyes that tell me that he knows that the world is going to be different for him. And so that's part of the reason why I have more recently spoken about some of the experiences that I've had that I haven't shared prior to, because I don't feel that I have the luxury anymore of being quiet about those things. These things are real. They happen to all people, not just that person or that type of person. We like to classify that there's a particular person that has an issue with the police. But I can tell you that I have, my father and I used to go on father-daughter dates. And one day afterwards, I was an adult, so I was in my own car. We were leaving a restaurant, and my dad had 2 drinks. I had 2 drinks also, but mine were cranberry juice. And so I was driving behind him, heading home, and the police pulled him over. My heart starts racing because I don't know why. So I pulled over as well. And the police officer starts walking toward the car with his beat stick in his hand. And he's doing like this, walking toward the car. And I'm watching, and I don't know what to do because I don't want to startle them. But I also don't want my dad to be hurt. So I hear them ask for license registration. I see my dad reach for it. And then I see another police officer come up to the other side of the car. And I had a fraction of a second, just like 30 seconds to make a decision. do I intervene or do I just sit here and wait for something to escalate out of control? And it happens so fast that, it can 1 minute, 1 second, you can be in a calm situation and it can go out of control really quickly. So I made the decision, maybe not the best decision, but I got out of the car and I loudly announced as I was walking forward, asking if there was a problem and that was my father. And, the police officers seemed a little startled because they were so invested in this situation that they hadn't even noticed that I was behind them. But anyway, I was able to talk to them and let them know what we were doing and that I was, following him home. And what I said to the officer was that, officer, I'm just following to make sure my father gets home safely. And I'm sure that that's what you want as well. So he said, oh, yes, of course. And so then I asked him, I'm not sure why we were stopped. And he sort of stammered out, he failed to pause at the stop sign. Well, I was right behind him. So whatever my dad did, I did also. But anyway, it was just, I can't even describe how frightening that was. But I made a decision in a 5-second time slot to intervene, knowing that there was a possibility that both of us could die in that situation. But that's a decision that I was willing to make.
That's interesting. It's interesting for you to juxtapose the current state your son's in to what you experienced as a child and wonder if it's worse now. All I know is that I hope that he creates the better world for all of us that I know young people of his abilities can. And I'm sure you're very proud of him. It'll be interesting to see him continue to grow and go on and make a difference. I'm sure you're very proud of him.
I am. And he doesn't seem to feel encumbered by any of those things. All of his friends are multiracial. He doesn't seem to see those differences. And as a matter of fact, the first time that he was in a school where it was majority white students, he came home from school and I asked him about his experience. And he said, there's another Matthew. And I said, really? Well, what's he like? And he said, well, I said, is he like you or is he different? And he said, he's different. And I said, how's he different? And he said, he wore a white shirt. This kid was blonde and blue-eyed. What was different about him?
That's interesting.
A white shirt.
I'm thrilled that optometry is starting to embrace the idea of diversity, and our schools and colleges are the lead of that. And I can't wait to see where that goes. But as I think about optometry, I think about my question to you in a pre-interview was, what's the biggest threat to optometry? And you've answered the same way that some other very important optometrists in my life have answered it, which is, you said optometry is the primary threat to optometry. Will you give us your perspective on that?
So I think optometrists, first of all, I just want to say are super smart, intelligent, bright individuals. And there are a lot of pain points that come up within our practice settings. But for some reason, we depend on other people to solve them instead of coming up with new innovations, thinking through the situation, working together to solve those issues. I think about, when we were first looking at going into EHRs, I mean, you took the initiative to establish one and you saw a problem and you tried to fix it. And I think more of us need to do that. We don't contribute to this is a legislative profession. 20% of us do the work, the legislative work. When I was in practice, every legislator on the north, south, east, and west side of me, couldn't go too much further east because I was close to the lake, were patients. And they were patients because I asked them. I went to their offices, I visited them, I talked about Senate bill, blah, 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 or this bill. And these are the things that optometrists are fully qualified to do, trained to do, should be doing. And we do a great job at doing it. And I'm inviting you to my office so that you can experience it firsthand. And every single person I gave that invitation to came to the office, and many of them stayed as patients. My US Congresswoman was a patient in the office the entire time that I owned that practice. So first of all we have to do is ask, but you are a subject matter expert for them. And when they need help with something, my state senator came to me once and said that she got a written complaint about an optometrist and she didn't know how to handle it. I read the letter that she got, and I asked her if she wouldn't mind if I wrote the letter back on her behalf. And she said, please do. So I did. I wrote the letter on her behalf, explaining why it was all about releasing a contact lens prescription. And, this person was a PhD, and they said, I know, I'm a PhD. I know when my eyes have changed. And so I pointed out in the letter the myriad of things that we look at in addition to your numbers changing, the ocular health, the systemic health, the fact that there are over 260 diseases that can be detected through the eyes, and that's systemic diseases, not eye diseases. So I just was able to point out that information for her. So anything I asked her afterwards, she was, can you support this bill? She was willing to do that. So we just have to understand the power, the influence that we have, and be willing to put ourselves out there. You got to eat a lot of chicken dinners. You got to go to the fundraisers. You got to pay for them. But 20% of the profession should not have to carry the 80% that do nothing but complain.
Well, that's a great point of view. Let's advocate for ourselves. So last question. This is done. You've got an evening coming up. Would you rather go for a long walk next to a lake, or would you rather read another book?
Oh my God, that's hard. Because I love books, but I think I'd take the walk. It's, not only is it good for you to get out and get some air, but I do some of my best thinking when I'm walking.
Great advice. Well, Dr. Millicent Knight, I can't thank you enough. On behalf of everyone that's listening, we really appreciate your thoughtful stories and this really inspiring career, which continues on our behalf. Thank you so much for being on Sandbox Stories.
Dr. Jens, thank you so much for the invitation. I appreciate it.
And to my audience, as always, thanks for attending and listening through this entire Sandbox story. Until my next Sandbox story, be great at all you do.